Thanks for that, Dom. Welcome to the India panel, ladies and gentlemen. India has a largely developed homegrown music industry that is self-reliant and self-sustaining with a massive booming middle class that spends quite aggressively. Bollywood films are synonymous with music. In fact, most are musicals, and hence the dependence on local repertoire is really large. Local repertoire in India accounts for 95%, and international repertoire accounts for about 5% in the physical world. And in the digital world, local repertoire accounts for about 98% of sales, and international music is about 2%. Quick facts about India: the physical music market is about 125 million US dollars in size, and about another $100 million for digital. In this entire thing, India is also one of those quirky markets where record sales have no necessary impact on touring, and where radio play may or may not have an impact on record sales. In fact, for the most part, copyright was assumed to be the right to copy. And of course, that impression has now changed over the past few years, and India has got spanking new copyright laws that are coming up. Hence, the question does arise, how the hell does one work international artists into India? And since a majority of the audience is from the international music community, this panel will discuss specifics of the direct potential of international music in India, primarily within the live music sector. I'm going to introduce the panelists on stage now. Zach Biddu. Zach, come on up on stage. Zach is the founder of UK&Y Music. He's come all the way from London. Zach produced the Invasion Festival in India, which was headlined by The Prodigy. And Zach works very close within the Indian market. Vijay Nair. Vijay? Vijay is the founder of Only Much Louder, which is one of India's most successful full-service music outfits that is at the intersection of bands, brands, and music. Vijay also manages India's hottest rock band, Pentagram, and has promoted acts like The Prodigy, Mumford & Sons, to name a few, and runs the really successful NH7 Festival. Somini Sridhara Paul. Somini heads the independent music platform Artist Aloud, which is part of Hungama, one of India's largest digital music platforms. Artist Aloud has emerged as South Asia's premier digital platform for unreleased music from both established and new musicians, local and international. And lastly, Vishal Dadlani. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand for this man. Vishal is one of Bollywood's hottest music composers today, with several chart toppers to his credit. Vishal, some of you might have seen him last night, is also the founder, composer, and lead singer of one of India's biggest bands, Pentagram, who are playing at Music Matters Live. If you haven't seen them, catch them tonight. All right, so the first question is to Vijay. As a promoter, you're involved with the live side of the business, and way before the world knew Mumford & Sons, you took a bet on them and you brought them into India. My question to you is, does a record deal really even matter to break in an international artist into India?
No, it doesn't matter for an international or even an Indian act for that matter. When we saw Mumford & Sons in Brighton, we just loved the band and kind of brought them in. And the idea was that they could probably release a record or do something more in India basis the live tour itself. So it was kind of the other way around. And we worked with the management very closely to create a model that would work for them. So it was a good 20-day trip, which included 8 shows, 2 music videos, a documentary, recording an album with Indian musicians, which went #1 on iTunes in UK. So it was an entire package kind of
What was that album called?
It's called the Dharohar. It's Mumford & Sons and the Dharohar Project. So it was a collaboration artist between them and some Rajasthani musicians. So yeah, we didn't just look at it as a tour, but because we have different divisions within the company, we worked with the management to put an entire package for them together.
Right. So you're saying acts that really don't really have a record out or an interest in having a record out, but if they're interesting, there's interesting opportunities to collaborate with local musicians or come in for a tour.
From a promoter's point of view, they just need to be a great live act, because we've never really counted on the album to be distributed before the act kind of comes in. They're not going to get mainstream television or radio coverage, so as long as they can perform a great live show, we know that we can bring in the right audiences for them. And if you tour them with the right Indian act, that's a good filter to get the right audience for them as well.
Right, great. Can you enlighten us currently how much media time on radio and television is given for international music? Would mainstream media like television support your efforts?
No. So Largely, MTV in India is Bollywood music and reality shows. Well, more reality shows than some Bollywood music. There's VH1, which plays international music, but has a very little market share. I think the entire consumption in that sense, or exposure for international music, is pretty much YouTube in India. And in fact, YouTube's number this year in India is more than most of the major networks put together. So it's, that's pretty much where the exposure really kind of comes in. Radio, of course, is fairly new in terms of it's just probably a decade or just a little more than that when radio kind of really came in. And in the entire country, maybe among the 250 odd stations, we have 2 stations that play international music in Bangalore and Delhi. In fact, in a major metro like Bombay, you don't have any station that plays international music, which is good for us as a promoter because there are no distractions. When you're promoting a show, all that you're doing is going online and finding the right kids to kind of come to your concert. We're not bothered about television, radio, print in a large segment. It's just kind of hygiene that you probably do a bunch of ads there.
There were some rumors about Star TV putting a show together that would have Western artists and Indian artists and really getting behind it in a large way. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and Star World is probably the largest English GEC in that segment, and we've been kind of working very closely with them. Our belief is that this content would work if it's with the right channel and the right approach. So we pitched, in fact, an entire show which is now going to go on air from September onwards. And the format was very simple and very inspired by what we did with Mumford & Sons. So it's an international act coming to India, traveling across the country for about a week, and the process of collaboration. So it's a music travelogue in that sense. And we've got literally a prime time slot on a weekend for a show like this. So this, I know, would probably a very important point in terms of getting those independent artists and international artists to a much larger audience. And we're really looking at booking all the acts who come down for tours later. Because once you kind of get this exposure, it's easy to fill in audiences.
Right. So, you know, we've been seeing Sounds Australia and people from Canadian Blast here. So how do people like a Sounds Australia or a Canadian Blast expose more acts in India? What kind of investments do they need to do?
Well, I think Sounds Australia is a great example because they really, I think the Canadian organization and Sounds Australia, they really push arts quite a bit there. Festivals are something that's very new, and I think that's probably the best way to really break an act to a larger audience, because one huge issue in India is we have indoor venues which cap at 800 or 1,000, and then you have the big open-air venues. There's nothing in between. So you can't kind of get an act into a 2,000 capacity show where it makes sense to just depend on ticketing for that. So I think if the music export offices in general, if I work with promoters, identify the right acts, use festivals as an anchor show, and then build a tour around it, that's probably the best approach to kind of break an independent act. And for us, I keep saying in terms of, we could have done a Mumford & Sons or a Franz Ferdinand or X number of other acts, but because none of them are really that well known in India in that sense, the effort that we have to put behind is exactly the same. So I'd rather work with a new act who's a great live act, or other than working with a big international act who might be huge abroad but doesn't mean much in India, and kind of work with the frill that comes around with those level of artists.
Right, great. Zach, you're coming here all the way from the UK, and as a promoter / agent, looking into producing more festivals and bringing in Western talent into India. A lot of the shows are actually dependent on sponsorship. Nothing happens without that. Nothing happens without a brand. What does an act really need to prepare itself for, both from a monetary perspective, a time perspective, both established acts, baby acts? How do you see that working?
I mean, culturally, it's dramatically different. Prior to a show, obviously, they've got to be aware that it's probably going to be a smaller fee, payday. It might be a stopover. It might be something just conducive for their schedule. A lot of those artists might not have been to India before, so they're not aware of the culture. And also, they might have certain expectations in terms of, the production and what they're used to. So you've got to get over all of that in advance, predominantly with the agents and the managers. I mean, so far on the festivals Vijay and I have done, the production's been incredible. So it certainly exceeded expectations. The Prodigy, who've obviously been headlining festivals for about 20 years, put it in one of their sort of top productions. So it is feasible to get over those hurdles.
And how about sponsorship? Because the rest of the world operates on a different sponsorship model. But one of the things that everyone here needs to know is ticket prices in India are really, really low. So the economics don't work as they might in the rest of the world. Everything is a guaranteed show, and hence the participation of a brand for sponsorship is really, really important. Now, this is really to both of you, both to Jack and Vijay. The fact that all the shows that you do are driven out of sponsorship, how does that work with the agents and managers, outside, say, in the States or the UK?
We're actually going through something at the moment with a very big American act where our potential headline sponsor for what will be one of the biggest shows ever in India is a liquor company. And we're dealing with a band who a couple of members have just come out of rehab. So
We're always dealing with bands where a couple of members have come out of rehab.
So, that's obviously a problem.
Problem, you said?
With the Prodigy, for example, I've had a 10-year relationship with the band, working with them around the world, so they were very flexible with regards to working with the brand, with our title sponsors. They actually name-checked the brand in all their idents and media, which is very novel for them to do. But I think it's because it was India. They didn't have a huge market there. They were less precious about what their fan base would think. And because of that reliance on sponsors to put on these big productions in India, you just have to make the bands aware that they've got to be that bit more flexible.
Right. And is that an uphill task, a daunting task? Or are you finding agents being a bit more flexible when it comes to that part of the country?
Yes. Compared to shows that I put on in Europe or America, agents, managers, artists are far more flexible.
Right. And would that mean, there was someone from LAMC Productions here yesterday. In terms of routing for a lot of artists, would you be working with some of the local promoters here across the region?
I think that's become more and more important, and I think that's also a good thing about Music Matters, where we've been meeting promoters from across Asia. For a lot of the acts, they're happy to a lot of acts really want to come and play India because they know that about 4 to 5 years from now, it's going to be a very dominant international market for most music, be it from whichever part of the world. At this point of time, they can only drop prices if there's a whole bunch of shows around it. Because traveling especially for American acts, traveling all the way to India for a single show, and usually right now we can only do single shows, not multiple shows within India because of lack of venues and infrastructure,
sure,
and sponsorships are limited. It makes sense to be part of an Asian routing and offer 8 to 10 shows together rather than just do solo shows. So that's an important aspect.
Sure, great. Zach, as someone based out of the UK developing business in India, you must have done a lot of homework prior to bringing in the Prodigy or working with Vijay. What are the traditional pitfalls, and this really is an answer for the promoters here in the audience. What are the kind of pitfalls, from a taxation perspective, licensing perspective, of doing business in India, of bringing in artists in?
For the artist, they've really got to work closely with the promoter. All the artists that we've brought in, from Mumfords to the Prodigy, Pendulum, and so on, they're all bands that we have, and managers and agents that we have fantastic relationships with. So they have to work with us because things aren't the same as what they used to in America or in Europe. There has to be some accommodation for the local culture, for the way the events are promoted, and for their performance. A classic example being when the Prodigy were just coming back on for Encore, we had the police on our back trying to cut the show because we were going a few minutes over, and I had to run on stage and tell Liam Howlett to cut his set, which they'd never experienced before, promoter running on stage. But they were great. He took a song out of the Encore, and it meant that we finished in time for our curfew. And so bands have to work with us to make it happen. So there has to be an enthusiasm from them to make a mark in India. From a business perspective, VJ, has been brilliant in terms of dealing with license applications and securing grounds and that sort of thing. He's better placed to speak about the on-the-ground practical issues than I am. In terms of taxation, there's a withholding tax, but that's the same, around the world, and you get tax credits and so on and so forth.
Sure. Thanks for that. Vishal, increasingly in India's film music industry, which is really the music industry in India at the moment, which it's called Bollywood. So we see interesting collaborations happening. Akon's done, or rather sung for a track that you'd composed for a Bollywood film. Snoop Dogg lent his musical genius to another soundtrack. Lady Gaga currently had her track from the new album remixed in India for the Indian market. There seems to be an increasing momentum in these kind of collaborations which help increase the artist's visibility in the Indian market. In fact, Akon toured on the back of, of that film work. So do you, as a composer who's bringing in fairly global sounds into the traditional Indian music industry, would you be looking at different musicians and artists to collaborate with? And if you could just help us understand what kind of music and music genres work best with the Indian audiences on a broad level?
Yeah, the whole Akon thing, Akon's basically sung on a couple of tracks for a rather large film that we're doing the songs for. I think the reason it works so well for him, even though the songs aren't out yet, and the reason it worked so well for Akon was because he took the time and the effort to actually show up, spend that time in India, do the press conferences, meet the people, you know, make it real. So it didn't seem like the difference. For example, the Gaga thing that you're talking about, that was a remix. Tracks were sent out, somebody in India did the remix and they put it back out. It did not have nearly the same impact. For the simple reason that I think it's important for the artist to actually show up, spend some time there and just kind of, you know, like Zach was saying, you know, just get into the local culture of things. The tracks that we have done with Akon has sung completely in Hindi.
Right, so there you go guys, Akon singing in Hindi.
Yeah, because you know, the thing is you're communicating with, or as an artist, he has the insight to want to communicate with a larger audience. You know, he's coming to India, with the intent to take his music and his message or whatever it is to the people. So we, in fact, there's a really interesting video of it that will come out when the songs come out as well, of us actually creating the songs in the studio with Akon. And there's a discussion in that about why we're doing the song in Hindi. We made the decision right there in the studio on camera. So I think that's a large part of it. I think that's important for an artist to kind of show up and bring their vibe and imbibe the local vibe and make a real collaboration of it rather than just a mix or whatever.
Right. So what you're saying and what you guys are saying is the fact that I think artists need to take in an investment from a time perspective, work with the local music composers if they need to broad base, or if they need to tour, work a little bit closely and a bit differently with, you know, with the tour promoters out there. Now, you know, my second question was what kind of music works best with the Indian audiences? Purely from abroad, you know, is it the regular top 40 stuff? Is it electronica?
India has its own musical sensibility, which is very inclusive. It includes sounds from all over the world. But essentially, fundamentally, what is primarily kind of driving the like music sales now is dance music. Dance music, which is very strongly based on ethnic rhythm, folk music. You know, so an international artist who comes in and understands that and kind of gets involved in that and learns that and kind of, you know, includes that into his personal vibe, has the best chance of really, you know, getting far.
So, you know, the obvious question that is warranted is, how do managers and agents sitting in the audience pitch their artists and their music to be considered for a collaborative opportunity or for a broader audience that they might reach via people like yourself, you know, that may also give them a wider platform than just touring?
The thing is, when you're doing the songs for a Bollywood film, that business is so established, so entrenched that they don't really like if you have, for example, the film that we've done with Akon, the gentleman in the lead in that film is a guy called Shah Rukh Khan. He's a fairly major star, I mean one of the biggest ever. So he's going to reach those people anyway, you know,
with or without Akon.
With or without Akon. What we're actually doing is adding value to Akon. That's something that people coming from abroad need to understand. They got to come in with that perspective. Also, it's very hard to add an unknown name to a film soundtrack because it doesn't bring them anything in terms of equity. So, but there are many other avenues which you can kind of use to kind of take your music to people. There's a lot of great local artists. Someone like Mumford & Sons collaborating with someone like, say, I don't know if you guys have heard a guy called Raghu Dixit. He's a phenomenal artist, just breaking out of India, doing great stuff. Something like that, that kind of, or what they did with the Dharor project, that's fantastic as well. I guess, I mean, you have to find your own ways. There are, even though the independent market in India is not as developed, not nearly as developed as the Bollywood market, but there are legitimate acts you can collaborate with and, you know, push your music out with that flavor
Sure.
that you need to kind of take it to the local people.
Just to step in there, sorry. It's not always possible for every artist coming in, just in terms of their schedule, to do a collaboration, you know, with a Bollywood artist, and obviously not all those artists are in the mold of a Bollywood collaboration.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, you know, there's other things that have to be done, but there definitely has to be something up front, be it some cool viral stuff that sits on YouTube, be it a press conference. There has to be something up front. You can't just come in cold if you want to sell thousands and thousands of tickets. No one quite has that, you know, reputation off the bat.
Great. So many, Hungama/Artist Allowed currently has deals with all the major telcos and carriers in India. Can Western artists have their music monetized on the mobile digital platform via Artist Allowed? Tell us a bit more how, you know, how managers and artists can work with your company specifically to benefit from India's large mobile 800 million subscribers.
Right. As a platform, artistallowed.com has the greatest advantage of being owned by Hungama, which has its distribution network not only in India but all over the world, which is one of the biggest offerings that we can provide to artists. We see a lot of artists, especially international, who may have deals for distribution outside of India, but India, for some strange reason, is not a part of the territory. But distribution is not going to be the only thing that will provide revenues or opportunities. It's what, like, something that we've also added as an offering is promotions in terms of digital social media, which was spoken a lot about yesterday, and that's something that we use very largely. Besides that, what we do even in terms of the live scene is adding a digital element to it. So, you know, we have concerts which we simultaneously or either do a live webcast or even do a like a pre-shot, but, you know, streamed out as a webcast, which again gets promoted. So, you know, you are crossing the barriers of geography by making concerts available to be viewed on the net. And that in combination is what's going to result in some kind of numbers, even through telco distribution. But it's not just about making your music available through these telcos, because there's millions and millions of even just Indian tracks that may or may not see downloads. But that's where we kind of differentiate. Yes, as Vijay said, you don't need an album release to do shows in India. But I think for an artist, they would want to make their music available through a digital or a physical platform. And, you know, even though they may not be really interlinked, it adds value. It's like, I think Vijay will say this, when one of his artists, Raghu Dikshit, did shows, and Raghu himself says that he's landed up selling more CDs at the show than possibly what the label released in the market, which is what can work when, you know, people like us, we make distribution available through WAP sites, through caller tunes. The artist has a captive audience. He can actually just say, hey, SMS so-and-so keyword to a short code, and, you know, you can make my song a caller tune, and that becomes the revenue model. So that's how we kind of complement distribution and promotions.
Right. When we talk about digital in India, digital is truly only the mobile music market. The the internet is really not a large revenue spinner. We have far low broadband subscribers compared to the, you know, floating numbers, but let's say about 800 million mobile subscribers. So how does that work? I mean, do you guys look at the internet as a large source of revenue, or is it just mobile?
No, I mean, I have to say internet has, especially like, for example, what Hungama has created is a dual delivery service. So you could be buying on the net, but you could download it onto your mobile. You can buy from the WAP as well. Of course, the Indian mentality is they're not very happy removing a credit card for a payment, but when it comes to the mobile service, you're billed through the operator, so it's more of a mind block that, you know, I don't want to remove a credit card to buy music, but as long as I'm billed at the end of the month, it's fine, you know. So that's what's, we see a lot of value there, but the internet works as a great showcasing platform, because till this point, mobile is more of a download method, which possibly so internet works like a radio station for that matter. You hear something, you hear music and you decide to buy it, which is what CDs were selling through. Now the internet helps us to sample the music, and then we kind of promote the destination through which people can buy on mobile. So I won't completely say internet is of no use. It works really well because promotion is the biggest thing. You can talk about having 100 million artists, but if you can't promote that, it's of no use.
Right, great. Vijay, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think just to kind of make a point that there are no really large legal downloading services in India. There's no iTunes, no Amazon. There's, in fact, there's very, I can't think of more than 1 or 2 services which exist, and that's very new. It's too late, in my opinion, to sell legal music online, because now you're dealing with a generation of kids who've never paid for music, and it's too late to kind of convert them. In a way, it's been a blessing for people like us, which is the independent industry largely, because piracy kind of created the independent industry. And before that, you walk into a shop and you had Pink Floyd, Doors, and Bryan Adams. That's about it. So with piracy, there's an entire new world of music that opened up, which is why there's a parallel industry that exists. So it's too late to kind of sell music, which is probably a good thing, I guess.
No, sure. Sorry, I just want to add a point there. I don't think we're trying to come in and actually fight piracy, because that'll be a little too presumptuous. But I have to tell you, I think it's not about people not wanting to buy music. The reason why people went into piracy was because they didn't get the music they wanted when they wanted to buy it. So stores didn't have it or stuff like that. So I think the matter here for especially Indians is about ease and accessibility rather than whether they should pay for it or not.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, on the topic of ease and accessibility, since we're kind of running out of time, I'm going to leave this floor open for questions. What, no questions? Everyone's hungry? No questions. It's a wrap then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You told me the music matters.